When the empath stops being the savior, the reality breaks. Carl Jung discovered something profound about individuals who spend their lives absorbing everyone else's pain and solving problems that aren't theirs. What he observed might completely shift your understanding of empathy. During his clinical practice, Jung worked with patients who displayed a very specific pattern. These were people who had become everyone's emotional safe haven: the friend who answered crisis calls at 2 a.m., the family member who always had solutions, the colleague who absorbed workplace drama like a sponge. But Jung noticed something fascinating. When these individuals finally stopped playing the savior role, reality didn't just shift around them, it completely shattered. Let me share what Jung discovered through his extensive work with these cases. He observed that highly empathetic people often develop what he termed participation mystique, a psychological state where personal boundaries become so permeable that they literally merge with others' emotional experiences. This isn't just being sensitive, it's a fundamental alteration of how their psyche functions. Jung's research revealed something crucial. This pattern typically originates in childhood as a survival mechanism. Perhaps they grew up with emotionally unstable parents, or in chaotic environments where being hyper-tuned to everyone's needs meant safety. Over time, this adaptive response became their core identity, shaping every relationship they would form in adulthood. Here's where it gets really interesting. Jung found that these savior empaths unconsciously seek out broken people to fix. It's not a conscious choice. It's driven by what he called the wounded healer archetype. They're drawn to dysfunction because it validates their sense of purpose and worth. The more chaotic someone's life is, the more essential the empath feels. One of Jung's patients described this perfectly. This individual had spent decades being the person everyone turned to during crisis. They were exhausted, depleted, but couldn't stop themselves from saying yes to every emotional emergency. They described feeling physically ill when they heard about someone's problems and didn't immediately offer to help. Then something shifted. They reached a breaking point and simply stopped responding to the constant demands. What happened next was both fascinating and devastating. The moment this person withdrew their emotional availability, their entire social ecosystem began collapsing. Friends disappeared overnight. Family members became hostile. Colleagues started treating them like they were selfish or had somehow betrayed everyone. The speed of this transformation shocked even Jung. Jung realized these empaths weren't just helping people. They were unconsciously maintaining everyone else's psychological equilibrium. They had become what he termed containers for collective emotional dysfunction. When they removed themselves from this role, all that unprocessed trauma and instability had nowhere to go, creating what Jung called psychological chaos in their social systems. The psychological dynamics Jung uncovered are quite complex. He observed that savior empaths often experience what he called inflation. They develop an unconscious grandiosity about their ability to heal others. They begin to believe they're uniquely gifted, that others genuinely need them in ways that aren't true. Simultaneously, they suffer from profound devaluation, believing they're only worthy of love when they're being useful. I need to share something that might feel uncomfortable. Jung was very clear that the compulsive need to save others often stems from unconscious narcissistic needs, not pure altruism. If you're recognizing yourself in this pattern, your motivations might not be as selfless as you believe them to be. The savior gets something out of being needed, a sense of superiority, control, and validation. Jung documented how these dynamics create what he called codependent systems. The savior empath and the people they rescue become locked in unconscious psychological contracts. The ones being rescued get to avoid taking responsibility for their lives, developing resilience or learning essential life skills. Meanwhile, the empath gets to feel essential, worthy, and morally superior while avoiding their own psychological work. These systems are remarkably stable until someone breaks the pattern. Jung observed that when the savior empath begins setting boundaries or becomes unavailable, the entire system becomes unstable. People who seemed grateful and loving suddenly reveal very different aspects of their personalities. When someone breaks this pattern and stops being available for everyone else's emergencies, Jung noted 3 predictable responses occur. First, people become angry and accusatory. You've changed. You don't care anymore. You're being selfish. They may bring up every time you help them as evidence that you owe them continued support. Second, they attempt manipulation through guilt trips, emotional blackmail, or creating bigger crises specifically designed to pull you back in. Third, if those strategies don't work, they abandon the relationship entirely, often with dramatic declarations about your character. This progression happens with startling consistency across different types of relationships. Jung observed it in families, friendships, romantic partnerships, and professional relationships. The pattern remains the same because the underlying psychological dynamics are identical. This is where most people cave and return to their old patterns. The social rejection feels too intense to bear. The guilt becomes overwhelming. They start questioning whether they're being selfish, whether they're abandoning people who truly need them. But Jung understood something profound. This breakdown is actually a breakthrough. It represents the collapse of false relationships built on dysfunction rather than genuine connection. If you're feeling exposed by this conversation, please don't turn away. What we're exploring could save you decades of unconscious suffering. Take a moment to really consider this. Your empathy might actually be your prison, not your gift. Jung observed that true healing for the savior empath requires what he called conscious suffering. Instead of absorbing everyone else's pain to avoid their own discomfort, they must learn to sit with their own anxiety when others struggle. This goes against every instinct they've developed over the years, every neural pathway they've strengthened through repetition. The therapeutic process Jung outlined involves recognizing what he termed projection. The savior empath projects their own need for rescue onto others. They compulsively save people because unconsciously they're trying to save themselves from their own unprocessed trauma, feelings of inadequacy, and fear of abandonment. Every rescue mission is actually a self-rescue attempt in disguise. Jung's approach involved helping these individuals understand that their empathy had become distorted and weaponized against both themselves and others. True empathy, he argued, involves witnessing someone's pain without immediately rushing to fix it. It means trusting others' capacity to handle their own struggles, learn from their experiences, and grow from them. But here's what Jung discovered that most people don't realize. When a chronic savior stops rescuing, they often experience what feels like a complete identity crisis. If they're not the helper, the fixer, the one everyone relies on, who are they? Their entire sense of self has been built around being useful to others. This existential questioning, Jung noted, is exactly where real transformation begins. The psychological mechanism behind this involves what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming authentically yourself rather than what others need you to be. For the savior empath, this means learning to differentiate between their emotions and others' emotions, their problems and others' problems, their responsibilities and others' responsibilities. Jung worked with patients who described feeling physically uncomfortable when they weren't helping someone in distress. They'd see a friend struggling and experience genuine anxiety, racing thoughts, even physical symptoms if they didn't immediately offer solutions. One patient described it as feeling like they were betraying their purpose in life when they resisted the urge to fix someone's problem. Jung recognized this wasn't empathy, it was compulsion driven by unconscious fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of confronting their own unresolved issues, fear of discovering they might not be as special or necessary as they believed. The deeper Jung explored this phenomenon with his patients, the more he understood about the childhood origins of this pattern. Many savior empaths grew up in families where emotional chaos was the norm. Perhaps they had a parent with mental illness, addiction, or severe emotional instability. Maybe they experienced trauma, neglect, or were parentified as children. In these environments, these future empaths learned that their safety and worth depended on their ability to manage other people's emotional states. They became hyper-vigilant to emotional shifts, expert at reading nonverbal cues, skilled at anticipating needs before they were expressed. These are valuable survival skills that served them well as children, but became problematic patterns as adults. Let me paint 3 scenarios that Jung would recognize immediately, scenarios that play out across America every single day. First scenario. Jennifer has been her family's emotional mediator for 25 years. Every holiday conflict gets routed through her phone. Every financial crisis requires her input, and often her money. Every relationship drama needs her perspective and intervention. She's exhausted, but believes this is what love looks like, what family means. One day her sister calls in crisis about her marriage falling apart, and Jennifer says something she's never said before. "I can't help you with this. You need to figure it out yourself or talk to a professional." Within 2 weeks, family members are calling her cold and selfish. Her mother accuses her of abandoning the family when they need her most. Several relatives stop speaking to her entirely, and she's excluded from family events. Second scenario. David is the colleague everyone turns to for support. Personal problems, work stress, relationship issues, financial troubles. David listens, offers advice, covers shifts when people are overwhelmed, even loans money. He's known as the nicest guy in the office and takes pride in this reputation. After years of this, he realizes he's burned out and resentful. He decides to establish boundaries and stops being available for these constant emotional downloads. He stops working overtime to cover for others, stops lending money, stops being the office therapist. His co-workers become distant and cold. They exclude him from social gatherings, stop inviting him to lunch, and some actively spread rumors about his attitude problem. The very people who seem to appreciate him most become his harshest critics. Third scenario. Maria has been her friend group's crisis counselor for years. Late-night phone calls about relationship problems, emergency interventions during mental health crises, constant problem-solving sessions about career, family, and personal issues. She prides herself on being the friend everyone can count on, the one who's always there. After a particularly intense period of multiple friends in crisis, she realizes she's completely depleted and has no energy left for her own life. She starts declining urgent phone calls, suggests friends seek professional help instead of calling her, and stops dropping everything to rush to their aid. Her friends accuse her of becoming fake, not caring about them anymore, and changing into someone they don't recognize. Several friendships end completely within months, with former friends telling mutual acquaintances that Maria showed her true colors. Jung would see these scenarios as identical psychological patterns playing out across different relationship contexts. In each case, the empath's value was contingent on their availability to absorb others' dysfunction and solve their problems. When they stopped providing this service, the relationships revealed their conditional nature. What's particularly striking is how embedded this pattern is in American culture. We celebrate the person who drops everything to help others, who sacrifices their own needs for everyone else's comfort, who puts family first, or is always there for friends. Jung understood that this cultural narrative enables and reinforces a destructive psychological dynamic. The savior empath becomes addicted to being needed, while others become dependent on having their problems solved for them. Neither party develops healthy psychological resources or authentic relationship skills. The entire system prevents growth and individuation for everyone involved. Here's what you need to understand. If setting healthy boundaries causes people to abandon you, they weren't actually in relationship with you. They were in relationship with your function. That's not love, that's exploitation disguised as connection. The deeper Jung explored this phenomenon, the more he understood that savior empaths often attract what he called psychological vampires, people who unconsciously seek others to regulate their emotional states, solve their problems, and provide the psychological resources they haven't developed themselves. These relationships feel intense and meaningful to the empath because they're constantly needed, but they're actually parasitic in nature. Jung identified that breaking free from this pattern requires what he termed withdrawal of projections. The savior empath must recognize that their compulsive helping often prevents others from developing their own psychological resources, resilience, and problem-solving skills. In essence, chronic rescue behavior can actually harm the people they're trying to help by keeping them dependent and underdeveloped. This is a difficult truth for savior empaths to accept because it challenges their entire identity. They've built their sense of worth around being helpful, around being the person others can rely on. The idea that their help might actually be harmful feels like a complete inversion of their worldview. The individuation process Jung outlined involves learning to tolerate others' discomfort without immediately moving to alleviate it. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means developing what he called mature empathy versus symbiotic empathy. This distinction is crucial for understanding healthy versus unhealthy empathetic responses. Symbiotic empathy, Jung explained, involves merging with others' emotional states and feeling responsible for changing them. The empath literally takes on others' emotions as if they were their own, experiences their problems as personal failures, and feels compelled to fix whatever is wrong. This creates enmeshment rather than connection. Mature empathy involves witnessing others' experiences with genuine compassion while maintaining psychological boundaries and trusting their capacity for growth and resilience. It means offering support without taking over, listening without immediately problem-solving, and caring without controlling. Jung noted that savior empaths often fear that setting boundaries makes them bad people. This fear stems from childhood conditioning, where their worth became tied to their usefulness, where love was contingent on performance and service. Breaking this pattern requires confronting the terror of being rejected for who they are rather than what they provide. The transformation Jung described involves what he called conscious relationship. Instead of unconsciously seeking people to save or fix, individuals learn to choose relationships based on mutual respect, reciprocity, and genuine connection rather than complementary dysfunction. These relationships can actually weather conflict, growth, and change because they're built on authentic foundation. Jung observed that this transformation often involves a period of loneliness and social isolation. When you stop being the savior, some people will leave your life entirely. This can feel devastating, especially when it includes family members or long-term friends. But Jung understood this pruning process as necessary for psychological health. Now, let me share with you the comprehensive framework Jung developed for understanding this transformation. I call it the authentic empath integration process, based on his clinical observations and theoretical work. Phase 1. Recognition. Becoming conscious of the savior pattern and its psychological origins. This involves honest self-examination about your true motivations for helping others and recognition of which relationships are based on function versus genuine connection. Many people resist this phase because it requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about their behavior and relationships. Phase 2. Withdrawal. Deliberately stepping back from the rescuer role and observing what happens in your relationships. This phase is often painful because it reveals which connections were built on your availability rather than mutual care. You'll see who gets angry when you're not immediately available, who tries to manipulate you back into the old pattern, and who respects your boundaries. Phase 3. Individuation. Developing an authentic identity separate from the helper role. This involves discovering your own interests, needs, values, and goals that exist independently of others' problems or crises. Many savior empaths have spent so much energy focused on others that they've never developed their own psychological resources. Phase 4. Integration. Learning to offer support from a place of genuine choice rather than compulsion. This means helping others when it truly serves everyone involved, not when you're driven by anxiety, guilt, or the need for validation. You develop the ability to say no without guilt, and yes without resentment. Phase 5. Authentic connection. Building relationships based on mutual respect, reciprocity, and genuine care, rather than savior-victim dynamics. These relationships can actually weather boundaries and individual growth because they're built on who you are, not what you do for others. The key insight Jung provided is that true empathy serves connection, while savior empathy serves separation. When you compulsively rescue others, you prevent them from developing their own strength, and you prevent yourself from being authentically known and valued for who you are rather than what you provide. Jung understood that the savior empath must learn what he called sacred selfishness, the recognition that taking care of your own psychological health isn't selfish. It's essential for authentic relationship. You simply cannot offer others what you don't possess yourself. If you're depleted, resentful, and running on empty, your help becomes contaminated with unconscious motivations. This process of transformation isn't quick or easy. Jung emphasized that individuation is a lifelong journey, not a destination. For savior empaths, it requires constantly checking their motivations, maintaining boundaries despite pressure to abandon them, and tolerating the discomfort of not being needed by everyone. But the rewards are profound. Jung observed that when people complete this process, they develop authentic relationships characterized by mutual respect and genuine intimacy. They discover interests and talents they never had time to explore. They develop a stable sense of self that doesn't depend on others' crises or approval. Most importantly, they learn to offer help that truly helps, rather than help that creates dependence. Their empathy becomes a gift rather than a compulsion, and their presence becomes healing rather than enabling. What we've explored together represents insights that took Jung decades to understand through his clinical work and personal journey. This isn't surface-level advice. This is deep psychological transformation that can fundamentally change how you experience relationships and your place in the world. If this conversation has resonated with you, I want you to take a specific action. In the comments below, share one relationship where you recognize this savior pattern playing out. You don't need to share details. Just acknowledge the recognition. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first crucial step toward freedom. After everything we've discussed, you have a choice to make. You can continue operating from the old paradigm where your worth depends on your usefulness to others, or you can begin the individuation process Jung outlined and discover who you are beyond the savior role. I want you to commit to one small boundary this week. Choose one situation where you'll resist the urge to immediately fix or rescue someone. Notice what happens inside you and around you when you make this choice. Pay attention to your anxiety, guilt, and the responses you receive. This is where your transformation begins. Finally, if you're ready to go deeper into Jung's work and understand more about breaking these unconscious patterns, let me know in the comments. Your journey toward authentic empathy and genuine connection starts with the courage to examine these hidden dynamics in your own life.